How's it going, guys? Conviction 454 here. And this video, I wanted to talk about the job titles that I believe that anybody who is new into IT should really be going after. Because I can understand with so many different titles. I mean, you've got help desk, you've got technical support, you've got NOC technician, data center technician. You've got, I mean, some of you want to immediately jump into cybersecurity, which I don't recommend. You got systems administrator. There's so many different roles that you can apply to in the IT field, but in this particular video, I wanted to talk about the roles that I believe that you should be focused on when you're just starting off. So we're talking about like maybe 0 to maybe 2 years of experience in the field. And so without further ado, I actually want to start with the role that you're probably expecting already, which is the Helpdesk technician role. So the way that I see it, there's really two different types of help desk. You have your internal, like one company, one help desk team sort of help desk, and then you have a help desk at like a managed service provider or a MSP. And so these two types of help desks are very, very different. So one type of help desk is really a lot more, I would say, well, I'll say less stressful. So you come in every day, you have a certain set of users that you support. So maybe you'll support anywhere from like 100 to maybe 300, 400, 500 employees, right? And typically companies like this will have their specific software suites and their specific setups. So they'll have their infrastructure, so their server, maybe they'll probably have multiple servers. They'll have their like their Microsoft 365 suite. They'll have their networking infrastructure, and it's really just one company. Maybe a few offices you support. Now for MSP IT support, specifically MSP IT help desk, it's a lot different. You're going to be supporting multiple clients, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of users. And because of that, depth, or I guess depth and breadth when it comes to your client base and the different user setups you'll find, really just the different infrastructure setups that you'll find. MSP help desk, I can tell you from experience, is one of those positions that's always hiring, but the reason why it's always hiring is a little bit darker than you might initially realize. A lot of people just simply cannot handle MSPs. I'm actually starting to lean towards that myself because I've worked in various different environments over the past 5-6 years, and I can tell you there's one particular MSP that I worked for a few years ago that literally, dare I say, not to overly exaggerate, but I literally almost lost my mind. Not to deter anybody who's trying to get into the field and really wants to consider MSP work, but it can be very stressful. And for me, the most stressful thing about it was that I think it was just my particular MSP. So I think there was a change in management twice in under a year for me, first of all. And then when I started off, I actually started off as just a regular like tier 1 help desk guy. And then my responsibilities ended up branching out to other departments, and where I didn't really know what I was doing, didn't really have the guidance. And so because of the culmination of staff and responsibility changes on a constant basis, I was there for 2 years, but after 2 years I just told myself, you know what, this isn't worth it anymore. And so if you're the type of person that really likes stability and just focusing on the core responsibilities that you have, and then mastering those responsibilities or mastering those technologies or what have you, then MSP work may not be for you. And I recommend looking towards another one of the positions that I'm going to talk about, or just sticking with like your traditional like internal one company help desk where maybe you have a few different offices you support. And so I would actually say that help desk is probably the most common entry point to get into IT, but it's not necessarily the easiest. Now, the next one is actually going to be what I consider the easiest to get into. All right, so the second job I want to talk about is technical support specialist or technical support analyst. And so when you're out applying for tech jobs, this is a specific job title that you shouldn't ignore. Now, just to give you a little bit more detail into that, not all technical support roles should be treated the same. For some technical support roles, you'll be focused specifically on like maybe a few pieces of software or like a very specific software suite. There's various companies that have their own sort of like technical product that you'll be supporting in that regard, and honestly that's not super helpful when it comes to getting like general IT experience, but it does give you customer service experience, which I do think is important for jumping into an actual IT role. But I should also tell you that IT, or specifically help desk roles, are actually sometimes just simply under the name of technical support. And so this is one of those things where you really have to look at the job description itself. And what you want to look for is things like, anything that mentions like desktop or PC support, anything that mentions maybe Windows, mentions like wireless connectivity issues, or like maybe teleconferencing or something among those lines, to give you an idea of if this is like actual IT or is just like a generic sort of technical support role that doesn't really relate to IT as much in the grand scheme of things. And so this is, like I said, this is a title that you shouldn't ignore, and I do think that it's actually the easiest point of entry, simply because technical support roles, again, it's probably the most commonly used like technical related job title out there, and they shouldn't be ignored. Now the next one is probably going to be a little bit harder to land, but I do think it is something that you should consider. All right, so job number 3 is actually going to be data center technician, and I think this is probably the most overlooked entry-level IT position there is out there, because it doesn't really align necessarily with what a lot of people consider entry-level IT, but I 100% consider it entry-level IT. As a matter of fact, you could even argue that it might be like half a step above entry-level, but I would say the reason why I consider it entry level, and the reason why I think it should be considered, is because it's really a lot less social, and that may appeal to a lot of people that are trying to get into tech, mainly because you will be dealing with customers to a degree, but your primary focus is going to be on infrastructure. So you're going to be touching servers and PCs and whatnot, networking infrastructure. Now, when you're starting off, your permissions and your responsibilities may be fairly limited because, well, you don't really have the experience. But I think data center technician is a good entry point, especially if you want to potentially pivot into like networking. Like, let's say you want to be a network engineer or network architect one day. If you work at a data center, you are definitely going to be involved with networking architecture to some degree. I definitely think that if you're trying to get in, that this is a job title that you should look for. Now, I would say I should also mention that in order to get a data center technician role, it may require at least getting like your Network Plus or CCNA, or a cert that I absolutely wish didn't exist at all, because I think it's kind of useless, is the CompTIA Server Plus. And the reason why I say that is because you just don't really see it often on job descriptions. Maybe I'm wrong. I've never ever been asked about Server Plus. I've never even bothered to take the exam, but I do think it may be a certification you should look for. In terms of about the role in particular, I've worked at a data center before, but I've worked at a very unconventional one. It was actually one with like 90% Apple products. Basically, we had a bunch of different Mac Minis, believe it or not. And my job, I actually worked the night shift, so I literally worked by myself. It was pretty much quiet 95% of the time. I literally studied most of the time or watched TV. But occasionally, I had a customer that may contact me and say, hey, I can't reach my Mac Mini, or hey, I need something installed on my Mac Mini. Can you help me out with that? And occasionally there was also some project where like helping the network engineers was like a VMware ESXi instance that they were having issues connecting to from like their like remote management software. But that was more of a one-off thing. But if I was new to the field at the time that I had the position, I definitely think I would have taken a lot more in. But anyways, I definitely think data center technician is a role you should consider, again, especially if you're trying to get into networking. Now, the next position is actually going to be more related to networking in particular. All right, so position number 4 is actually going to be NOC Technician. Now, this role is probably going to be a little bit harder to land than like a help desk role, and maybe just slightly easier than a data center technician role. But essentially, what a NOC technician does is, by the way, I've never personally worked as a NOC technician. I'm just going off of, what other NOC technicians that I've been around have told me, is that they are essentially the first line of support for any sort of networking issues. They also deal with, of course, networking infrastructure. They deal with cabling. They deal with like fiber optics and stuff like that. They support switch configuration issues, wireless access point issues, or I guess wireless connectivity issues in general, as well as like firewall issues. Just basically, it focuses on networking. And of course, they're kind of structured like an MSP in a way where they have multiple clients that they support. And then they go off of like a rotating schedule and whatnot. But the reason why I consider it entry level is because, well, NOC technician typically has tiers. So you can start off as like a tier 1 NOC technician, then you can go up to like tier 2, tier 3, which is I think more like an engineer. And then I think they even have like architects and stuff like that if you want to go the NOC technician route. Now, in order to get a NOC technician role, it's probably good to have at least one networking cert. So like Network Plus, CCNA. Like I said in previous videos, I recommend ignoring the CCNA altogether. I'm sorry, not the CCNA, the Network Plus. Ignore the Network Plus altogether. The CCNA is an absolutely great cert. I think it's actually the perfect entry-level networking certification because it doesn't just teach you like the basic networking concepts. It actually teaches you those and then goes beyond that. You have to actually get hands-on with networking infrastructure, networking, like actually how to configure a switch and a router and stuff like that in order to pass it. For Network Plus, you can memorize a few different facts here and there, but you don't actually learn, or you don't learn any commands. You don't actually learn any like hands-on elements to it. And you can still pass without issues. So if you can avoid the Network Plus, I recommend it. If not, then take it just to get the HR filtering out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. But yeah, I do think that this is an entry-level point to start off with if you are really interested in networking, and I don't think the barrier of entry should be too difficult, even in today's market. Now, the last position is going to be one that's a bit less common, but it is out there, and I definitely think it should be brought up. All right, so the last position that I want to talk about is Endpoint Technician. Now, this role, like I just mentioned before, is a role that's a lot less common, and it's going to sound kind of like a data center technician, but not really. So Endpoint Technicians, and I've actually, believe it or not, accidentally worked as an endpoint technician before when I really thought I was getting a systems administrator role, but that's the story for another day. So endpoint technicians deal specifically with like laptop configurations, desktop configurations, other mobile devices like cell phones, tablets, etc. And they essentially focus on everything from collecting the hardware, deploying the hardware with the operating systems and all the software it needs, and then typically sending it out to clients or customers. And so in the scope of working as an endpoint technician, you're often going to be working with tools like Microsoft Intune, which is used in pretty much all Microsoft environments now. You may learn about SCCM, which is actually something that I haven't worked with personally because it seems like a lot of companies are starting to lean towards Intune more. Beyond that, you'll also learn about the different ways to deploy hardware, such as through a USB, of course, or Pixie boots, which I think stands for like process execution executable or something like that. Essentially, you're using a server or a Pixie server to deploy an image to a Windows device. But those are the types of concepts that you will learn. And truth be told, I think for this type of role, if you have like your A plus, maybe your security plus, you can 100% land a role like this. And truth be told, it's probably, I'm not going to say easier to land than Helpdesk. They may require you to have like 1 year of technical support or Helpdesk experience before they let you be an endpoint technician. But honestly, I don't necessarily think that you really need a lot of experience to be an endpoint technician. So if you see this title out there, then I 100% recommend that you apply to it. Definitely, if you remember nothing else, like actually look at the job descriptions and then read for yourself and see what the role is actually going to entail. And then not only do you read it, if you do apply to it, not contact, but wait for HR to contact you, and then start asking questions like, hey, like how much of this is going to be involved into the role? Because a lot of times HR doesn't know what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, I believe that I'm not sure if HR actually writes or creates the job descriptions. What I've heard is that from an actual person in HR is that they'll actually contact the hiring manager, have a meeting with them. I forgot what the meeting is called. They have a certain term for it. And then they'll converse with the hiring manager about the specific type of role. And HR, they kind of just sit in and, listen to whatever the hiring manager tells them, and they put that on the job description. So basically you're taking the word of the HR representative that you're working with that the job that you're applying for is actually, a job that you even want to deal with in the first place. That's what I've heard anyway. I'm not sure how true any of that is. But anyways, so that's pretty much the 5 positions that I wanted to talk about. Now, I wanted to also briefly talk about some positions that 100% are not entry level. Systems administrator, this is not an entry level role. You're usually going to need about, I would say, 2 to 4 or 5 years of experience of Helpdesk, NOC Technician, maybe even both, in order to actually qualify for a systems administrator role. So if you're seeing that in Indeed, LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, and you're just starting out, just know that you're going to have a really rough time getting a systems administrator position. And the reason why is because you're going to be dealing with a lot of systems. You're going to be dealing with endpoints, networking, security, cloud, just a lot of different technologies. And so when you're starting off, you're really going to have a hard time landing a role like that. So I definitely recommend starting off with one of the 5 roles that I mentioned previously. Another non-entry level role that a lot of people apply to, network engineer. I mean, come on. Network engineers, they're designing, building, and really to a degree architecting entire network systems. And so they're not just deploying switches, they're configuring the ports, they're configuring the security on those ports, they're configuring network maps for different client sites. Like, this is in-depth, detailed work that you have to have some sort of experience in. So I recommend getting Helpdesk, getting NOC Technician experience, or even data center technician experience before you bother trying to get a network engineer role. And even for junior network engineer, truth be told, it may be even difficult to get a junior network engineer role. So that's just something that I wouldn't start off with if you're fresh into IT. And there's several other roles that aren't entry level that you guys are probably applying for. But another one that I'm going to mention is cybersecurity analyst. This is a role that even I, right now, with 5-6 years of experience, I'm struggling to even get interviews for because, well, first of all, the cybersecurity market is in absolute shambles right now. There are people that are getting positions, and a lot of them either already had experience or they're not getting these roles in the conventional sense. They probably knew somebody and they got a referral or something like that, or they went out and got several certifications like CYSA, Security Plus, CISSP. I think there's one called SSCP or something like that. I don't know. There's so many certs out there, but this role is an entry level, and frankly, SOC analyst isn't entry level either at this point. Maybe it is. It's one of those gray area roles where you don't necessarily have to have a ton of security experience. Maybe today you have to have at least a year, but even then those are tough to land as well. So if you're fresh into IT, I recommend starting with one of the 5 roles that I mentioned. If you can find a way around those roles, then hey, good for you. But I'm just going to let you know that for the average person, it's probably not going to be easy. But yeah, anyways, that's probably going to be it for this video, guys. As usual, thank you for watching. I'm actually going to something that I haven't been doing recently is actually creating chapters in my videos, because I tend to ramble off for quite a bit when it comes to making these videos, simply because I really want to share my knowledge, my experiences with you guys, and I just really want to do that in a way where anybody that's watching can click on the video and say, okay, maybe I don't care about this part or that part or that part. I just want to hear this particular part. So that's going to be something that I try to make the cognizant effort to do moving forward. But anyways, as usual, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.